the key ingredient for kids is to have regulated adults around them. And that's really the challenge for us as the grown-ups in kids' lives, is how do I anchor in regulation so that I can be regulated and offer that safe, predictable, welcoming energy to my child.
Welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. I'm your host, Debbie Reber. If you are a regular listener of this show, you'll be familiar with Polyvagal Theory, as it's come up in multiple interviews, including those with Dr. Mona Delahook and Seth Perler. But this episode is the first one dedicated solely to exploring this powerful theory. And to do that with us, I am thrilled to be talking with Deb Dana, a clinician, consultant, and author who's known for being a translator of polyvagal theory, which was developed by Dr. Stephen Porges in the mid-1990s. In this episode, Deb gives us a primer of the key points of polyvagal theory, and in doing so, explains the ways in which it can support the way we parent our differently wired kids. Deb Dana explains nervous system pathways, why co-regulation is essential to our survival, what befriending and listening to our autonomic nervous system looks like in practice, and the benefits of having a breathing practice. We also talk about why these concepts can change our relationships to our daily life, even if our circumstances stay the same. Before we dive into this interview, here is a little more about my guest. Deb Dana, a licensed clinical social worker, uses the lens of polyvagal theory to understand and resolve the impact of trauma and create ways of working that honor the role of the autonomic nervous system. She's a founding member of the Polyvagal Institute and developer of the signature Rhythm of Regulation clinical training series. She's the author of several books on polyvagal and the nervous system, including the one we're talking about today, Anchored: How to Befriend Your Nervous System Using Polyvagal Theory. I just loved this conversation so much. As you'll hear, it kind of blew my mind open in unexpected ways. And since we first recorded this conversation, it has continued to impact the way I parent and move through the world. I hope it lands for you in an equally powerful way. Thanks so much. And now here is my conversation with Deb Dana. Hello, Deb, and welcome to the podcast.
I am really happy to be here and to meet you and to dive into a conversation.
Yeah, me too. This is a conversation I've been looking forward to and was thrilled when you accepted my invitation to come on the podcast. I know you're interviewed a lot, so I want to just start with your personal why, and if you could just tell us a little bit about the work that you do in the world.
I like that, my personal why. Yeah, it's a thing I've been reflecting on recently because, I'm 69 and I'm at that place where I'm trying to decide what is it that I want to bring out into the world. And my passion is really for helping people understand how their nervous system operates so that they can begin to become active operators of it. Because the nervous system is at the heart of every moment in our lives. And I think in the world we're living in right now, a regulated nervous system is a path forward to healing, to individual and community well-being. And it feels like it's a time to really be offering how I look at this work to others. So I suppose my personal why began in the clinical world. I'm a clinician, and began, wanting therapists to be able to help their clients in a different way. And now it's expanded to, can we help reshape the world perhaps so that it's a safer place for people to live?
I love that mission. And it is so timely. You are known as a translator for polyvagal theory, which I love because it is complicated. Even reading your book, which we'll talk about today, I was telling my child, I have to keep going back and rereading these paragraphs. And you're breaking it down in such an accessible way, but it's a complicated theory and just concept. And It's something we've dabbled in here on the show. Dr. Mona Delahook has been on a couple times, and I know her work is very rooted in polyvagal theory. To talk about your book, what were you hoping to do through Anchored? And the subtitle is How to Befriend Your Nervous System Using Polyvagal Theory.
Yeah, and we should give a beautiful round of sending gratitude to Stephen Porges, my dear friend and colleague, who is the developer of polyvagal theory. And he and I were actually talking earlier today and just really marveling on his creation, right? Which has then allowed us as people, as clinicians, as parents, partners, to understand how we are human in a different way, which really I think is the gift of polyvagal theory. And for me, I think, writing Anchored was to bring these three organizing principles that I talk about, neuroception, hierarchy, co-regulation, out of the therapy office and into the family home and everyday life, because this really is, I think, the foundation of how we move through the world. Those three, Steve has lots of principles in polyvagal theory. And I think, these three to me really feel like the important ones. So you and I just met a few minutes ago and our nervous systems are getting to know each other, right? And that's what happens moment to moment in our lives, and understanding how that happens through, if we start with neuroception just for a minute, that our nervous systems are communicating through this biological experience, right? Our brains are then bringing some logic to the experience, but it's a embodied experience we're having, and it's happening all the time inside our bodies, in the environment we're living in, and between nervous systems. And I think if we just understand that to start with, it's pretty profound, right? It's a powerful experience, because I can feel into my own experience and go, oh, I'm feeling a little on edge. And then I can go back to neuroception and say, well, neuroception is feeling some signs of danger in one of those pathways. Which one is it? Or maybe all of them. And I can begin to look at those pathways and do something with them. The same is true if I'm feeling really, welcomed, which I am with you at the moment, and I could stop for a minute and think, ooh, those three pathways are getting a welcome. What is it? Right? Because when we know this about ourselves, we can begin to use that information wisely. Right? I think that's a missing piece of information for most of us. We don't think about this biological conversation that's going on.
It really is such a game-changing concept. And you talked about the pathways. And in my last conversation with Mona, we talked about the nervous systems and the pathways of our kids, which she talks about the red, green, and blue pathways. But could you describe the pathways as you've explained them in your book?
Yeah. So the neuroceptive pathways, and then we have the hierarchical pathways. And I think Mona in the red, green, blue, I can't remember her colors, is talking about the hierarchical pathways. So let's talk about the neuroceptive pathways, which we touched on first. The nervous system is always getting information from inside our body, outside in the world around us, and between in the connection with other nervous systems, with other humans, right? Or even with pets, right? With our mammal pets, we get that. So that inside, outside, between is always bringing information. But because it's neuroception, we don't listen to it unless we tune in. Unless we invite our brain to pay attention in a certain way, then we can tune in, which is, like, oh, so what is going on in this moment? And you might take a moment and just listen in those three pathways. So listen inside your body and what is going on, right? It's late morning for me as we're doing this. And I just had a second cup of coffee a while ago, and inside it feels very warm and relaxed. So for me, it feels safe inside. Other people might have a different experience. And then outside in the space you're sitting in to listen, does it feel like a welcoming environment, or is it a bit of a warning in your environment? And then the between, right? In the between, and for people listening, the between can happen because our voices are reaching out. Right. You and I get to also see each other, which adds that other between. But even the people who are just listening, there's a between happening. So that's the neuroceptive 3 pathways. And when the signs that we get are welcomes, we then move to a certain place on the hierarchical pathway. When they're warnings, we move to one of the 2 survival states. And that's where Mona's might be, red, yellow, green. What we want to talk about is at the top of the hierarchy is what is called ventral. And then the first survival state we go to is sympathetic, fight and flight. And most of us know that pretty well. And the third state, the other survival pathway, is what is called dorsal. And it's a place of shutdown, collapse. Right. So we have these 3 states, and depending on the signs from neuroception, we are then taken to one of those states. So we get that conversation between neuroception and hierarchy. And I think that's a lovely thing to understand, that it's our neuroception that then drives us to one of these states. And so again, when we're in one of these states, we have certain thoughts, feelings, behaviors, stories that come alive. And they're very different depending on which state we're in. And I think, again, for moving through the world on our own, understanding, I'm in more sympathetic anxiety at the moment. And so the story that my brain makes up around that is one about the world not being safe. If I'm in ventral, feeling okay, regulated, organized enough to make it through the world, the story my brain makes up is, it's interesting to explore today. And if I'm in dorsal, that other survival state, where I'm in collapse, shutdown, disconnection, the brain makes up a story that says it's hopeless. Don't even bother. Right. And what's interesting to remember is that nothing in the experience is different. The experience stays exactly the same. It's my nervous system state that brings these different stories, behaviors, beliefs, feelings to life. Right. So when I'm working with people, what I like to say is I can't change what happened to you, and I can't necessarily change what's happening now, but I can change your relationship with it, because I can help you find the state of regulation that opens a different story up. And I think that's really, again, some of the powerful learning we have from this theory.
Yeah, again, it is such a different way of looking at things and understanding our responses, our kids' responses. We'll be right back after this quick break. During this month of planning and organization for big transitions, rhythms and routines have been absolutely essential for our physical and emotional well-being. So Green Chef nights are reliably and predictably a good night. We know the ingredients will be fresh and prepped, the instructions easy to follow, and the meal delicious. We're all still talking about last week's turkey tacos with mango chimichurri sauce, refried beans, and Monterey Jack cheese. Green Chef contributes to a healthy lifestyle with easy and delicious menus like fresh seasonal salads and grain bowls. And with over 80 weekly meal and market options, plus rotating options to suit a variety of lifestyles, whether Mediterranean, plant-based, calorie-smart, keto, protein-packed, gluten-free, there are always plenty of options to choose from. Whatever you select, you'll get farm-fresh ingredients, organic whole fruits and veggies, and premium proteins, all delivered straight to your door. I love those 4 words. Straight to my door. Oh, and one more thing I love about Green Chef, they have an app, which means it's easy to manage meal preferences and delivery from your phone if you want to. And I, for one, want to. I am in that mode where I'm making the most of little moments like waiting in line at the pharmacy or for the F train to pull into the station to tackle all of those to-dos. So the convenience of an app is key for me. Green Chef has a special offer for Tilt listeners. Go to greenchef.com/tilt50 and use code TILT50 to get 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months. That's 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months when you use the code TILT50 at greenchef.com/tilt50. Maybe I've watched too many seasons of The Amazing Race, but every time I have to go somewhere on the subway, I treat it like a competition. It's all about making the right gut decisions about which route will get me there the fastest. Sometimes those decisions get me where I'm going early, and other times my gambles don't really pay off. Probiotics can't help with most gut decisions, but if your gut needs a little support, Ritual has your back. Their Synbiotic Plus, a 3-in-1 supplement, has clinically studied prebiotics, probiotics, and a postbiotic to support a balanced gut microbiome. I've been using Synbiotic Plus for about 6 months now, and it's become a core part of my morning routine. I take the mini capsule every morning while making my way through my inbox, whether I'm at home or I'm on the road, because it doesn't need to be refrigerated. And the capsule itself is delayed released, which helps it survive the harsh conditions of the upper GI tract for delivery to the colon. And that's exactly where we want it to go. Ritual invested in a study modeling the human colon, which showed that Synbiotic Plus significantly increased microbial diversity and the growth of beneficial bacteria. There's no more shame in your gut game. Synbiotic Plus and Ritual are here to celebrate, not hide your insides. Get 25% off your first month for a limited time at ritual.com/tilt. Start Ritual or add Synbiotic Plus to your subscription today. That's ritual.com/tilt for 25% off. I want to talk about co-regulation, but before we talk about that, I guess I'm wondering, based on our nervous systems and knowing who the audience for this show is, we have kids who often spend a lot of time emotionally dysregulated, may have pretty intensely wired nervous systems. And so I'm just wondering, is this something that we're born with? Is this mostly nature? Is it part nurture? Like, what's really going on there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we come into the world perhaps with sensitivities. But what the research tells us that our nervous system is shaped by our lived experience. So that could be a nature nurture. Well, there's a lot of research that tells us that we can reshape our system. And that's really why I'm a therapist, to help people reshape their systems. Why I want to bring this to the world, because I want people to know you're not locked into the patterns of protection that you experience right now. You can build patterns of connection, and the world can feel different, can look different for you. So for kids who have more sensitive nervous systems, right, whether it's the neurodiverse community or the population I worked with, were kids who grew up in dangerous family systems, dangerous worlds, abusive experiences, and their systems are shaped by those experiences as well. And the lovely thing is that over time we reshape those systems, right? And the key ingredient for kids is to have regulated adults around them. And that's really the challenge for us as the grown-ups in kids' lives, is how do I anchor in regulation so that I can be regulated and offer that safe, predictable, welcoming energy to my child. For me, it's to my grandkids or to the children around. And the thing I would love to say is that none of us are anchored in ventral all the time, right? It's not possible to do that. And so if you're a parent and, you've reached the point where you cannot hold your anchor in ventral, know that you're not alone, right? It happens for all of us many times a day. We leave and come back. And it's not the getting pulled out of ventral, out of regulation, that's the problem. It's if we get pulled out and get stuck in dysregulation. Right? If we can't find our way back to regulation. So the goal is to find ways to return home. I call it home to ventral, right? And when we're with our kids, help our kids begin to create their own pathways back to regulation, right? And it's challenging to do. Challenging for grown-ups in the world we're living in right now, and then challenging for kids because they're just learning, right? I think the nervous system inherently knows how to take us back to regulation. I do believe that. I think it's built into our systems, but often we have to uncover those pathways and then walk those pathways often so that they become well-worn pathways. And, with the kids that I see, and even thinking about my grandkids, they get dysregulated and they can't find that pathway back. And it's up to some adult in their world to be regulated and say, let me help you find the pathway back, right? Then once you get on that pathway, you can begin to see the system coming back to regulation. And, we have to be patient with that process.
In thinking about co-regulation, I wrote down that you said in your book, without co-regulation, we can't survive. And even just reading that really blew my mind, because in this work that I do, being the parent of a neurodivergent kid, first of all, co-regulation, it feels like kind of a new concept to me. And then in the context of, wow, this could be really cool. Like, this would be a nice to have. Wow, if we can co-regulate with our kid, that would really help them calm their nervous systems. But to read that it is essential for all of us for survival. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and I think it's important to talk about, because in the world we live in, we talk about self-regulation all the time, right? Self-regulation is what everybody's trying to teach and reach for. And yet, if we only self-regulate and can't also co-regulate, we can't experience well-being, right? And in the developmental order of things, we really need to learn co-regulation with a safe other first. And then on top of that, self-regulation then emerges. And for many, many people, that's not the case. It's done in the opposite way for all sorts of survival reasons. So yes, co-regulation is a biological imperative. We need it to survive and to thrive. And we sometimes are in relationship with people for whom co-regulation is very challenging, right? And then our experience on the receiving end of that is often a move into some sort of survival state, because the expectation our nervous system has is that we're going to reach out and someone will reach back, right? And for many, many of us, that doesn't happen for all sorts of reasons, right? I use my personal experience with my husband, Bob, who had a stroke 7.5 years ago. And so his capacity for reaching and offering for reciprocity changed and has not returned to what it was. And my nervous system still has that experience of feeling, the wound, like the missing. And then my brain can come online and say, oh, it's not that he cares any less for you, but he can't respond the way he did. But on a biological level, we have this expectation of give and take, back and forth, ebb and flow, right? And so for so many people, that doesn't happen. And then we have to see, where do we find the co-regulation we need so that we can offer what is needed to another person, right? And sometimes we look somewhere else so that we have enough inside ourselves to offer until the other person or the child is able to reciprocate in some way. And I find that with parents and kids a lot, when a kid is just not ready yet to be in that reciprocal relationship, or is wired differently, and the reciprocity looks different and feels different. I have to help the parent figure out, how do you find what you need so that you can feel filled, and then you can get what you're looking for and offer in this other relationship, and the relationship with your child. So there are lots of ways to find co-regulation. And in the work with couples that I do, I tell people we don't usually find it all in one relationship. It's just not the way we're built. It's multiple relationships that fit all of the things we're looking for.
I'm wondering too, I live in New York City, so my child and I are often on public transport. My kid takes the subway to school. Lots of people, lots of different energy. So when we're talking about co-regulation, is this something we're constantly doing, especially kids maybe who do have more finely tuned nervous systems?
Yes, always, because you're through neuroception, you are always getting those cues. Right. And then the work is to, sometimes become more aware of the cues, and sometimes have a filter for the cues. There's both ends of that continuum, where maybe I'm walking through the world and I'm oblivious to the cues. They're not rising to the level of my awareness, or maybe I'm walking through the world and I'm getting bombarded by the cues and I can't make sense of them or turn the volume down on them. So both are true. And, we talk about co-regulation. We also dysregulate. And we see that all the time. We see I'm surrounded by people who are anxious or panicked, and my nervous system, follows them along, because it's too much for me. And so I enter a survival state as well. And we see that often when lots of nervous systems are dysregulating at the same time, that co-dysregulation happens. So yeah, and I was just thinking you're talking about your child who rides the subway to school, and I live in Maine, right? No subways, no, none of that. I was like, wow, that would be an interesting experience, for my kids, and my two granddaughters walk to school, right? It's like they just walk a couple of blocks and they're at school. I'm thinking that would be a very different nervous system experience, right? To be around so many other nervous systems regularly. And then, by the time your child gets to school, their nervous system has had to meet a whole bunch of challenges. And the challenges can change every day. It's unpredictable. You never know who's going to be on the subway with it. And unpredictability is really challenging for our nervous systems. So I can begin to understand what it must be like when your child gets to school. And then when we think, and then when you get to school, you then have to create connection with another group of nervous systems. And we have a teacher, or more than one, hopefully, but at least one adult who then has to try and navigate how is she or he the regulating influence for all of those nervous systems. We begin to see the complexity of bringing our beings together in this way.
You're making me want to move to the country.
Yeah.
So your book, you share a lot of strategies and methods for helping to get your ventral vagal system back online. One of your chapters earlier on is called Learning to Listen. And you talk about befriending your autonomic nervous system so that we can really start to know what it feels like when we go offline. This is an area of challenge for so many of my listeners because we are often triggered by our kids' behavior and then we struggle to co-regulate. So what does learning to listen really look like?
Yeah, if we look at the world through the lens of the nervous system, we are really being asked to be responsible for our state and then be responsible for what we're putting out into the world from that state. And, finding regulation, coming there and anchoring there is the goal, but it's very hard. And what I love to tell people is that it's the micro moments that are what we need to start with. It's not a great big, I'm going to stay regulated for the entire day today. Nope, I'm not. First of all, I'm not. I can't. And second of all, that's not what I need. I need to notice the micro moments. That's where I would start. So the moments when you feel okay enough, somewhere I started talking about ventral vagal okayness. It's not Zen bliss, amazing, all of that. It's just okay. I'm okay in this moment. I can see my way forward. I can engage with the world. I'm organized enough to feel okay. And that came from my clients. They would say, oh, okay. Right. And then it was like, that's beautiful. And I called those micro moments glimmers. Right. And so we're looking for glimmers because when you find a glimmer, your nervous system has this experience of, oh, okay. And then your nervous system, your biology starts looking for more. Right. So I'm always looking for ways that we can make it easy for us to achieve more regulation, because I think parents especially have so much on their plates, to say, so add this practice to your day. They'll look at me like, are you kidding? Where would I do that? Right. And for many of my clients, the same is true. They're just trying to survive the day. So how do we make things easy? So, glimmers are a way that's easy because they truly are all around us, but we miss them. So it might just be, as you wake up, you might say, I'm going to see if there's a glimmer on my path today. A glimmer. That's it. Because truly, once you start seeing them, you will begin to look for more. And some of the common places to find them are nature, right? So it can be actual nature or it can be images of nature. It does the same thing to our nervous system. And music seems to be all around us. Art and some sort of movement. Right? Movement brings some ventral, because we humans are made to move. We just are. We're made to be moving through the world. And so that there are these tiny moments when everything feels something settled inside and it's like, oh, okay, that's a glimmer. So look for those, right? It's a reminder that in the midst of this challenge of your daily life, your nervous system also has the capacity to bring you micro moment of regulation. And that I think is so important when we're working and we're in the midst of a dysregulated kid who's had a meltdown and I just can't, right? To know that that is true. And I also have the capacity wired into my biology to notice a glimmer, right? I can't in that moment because I'm way too dysregulated, but to come back and remember, oh, this is a both and. And I think both and is so important for all of us as we try to navigate connecting with others.
Oh my goodness, you shared so much there. First of all, I love the concept of okayness because I think a lot of us judge ourselves for not showing up in the way we think we need to or that our kids demand of us. And then we are not compassionate with ourselves, and going down that road makes it even harder for us to kind of get back to the parent that our child needs. So I love this idea of okayness. And also within that, just to be clear, I think this both and is so important because we tend to think, or even before I read your book, I was like, so the goal is to really live in this ventral vagal state, and it's not, right? That's not what we're working towards. So what are we looking for?
Well, the goal is to know when I'm there and know when I have been pulled away from there. And again, the nervous system needs compare and contrast experiences. So I don't know I'm there unless I know what it's like to not be there. Right? That we need both of those. And so the goal is to know when I'm there, when I've been pulled out of there, and have tools that help me get back there. That's the goal, right? So we call that a flexible nervous system, one that can then be regulated, can dysregulate, and can come back to regulation. That's the goal for our kids too. We don't want our kids to always be in this place of regulation and calm, right? We want them to be able to navigate the challenges to dysregulate and come back to regulation. And as we do that more and more, we build resilience. That's what resilience is. It's dysregulating and coming back to regulation. If we look at it through a biological lens, that's resilience. And if I can be resilient and help my kids be resilient, that's a beautiful thing because they are going to face challenges that will dysregulate them. We all do. And to know that they have some tools to find the way back, the ordinary challenges of every day. And then when we meet extraordinary challenges, we go find a good therapist who can help us create some more pathways, right? But my goal is to help people be able to navigate the ordinary and even some of the extraordinary challenges of daily life without needing a professional, but needing other people who understand the world in the same way, which, if we come back to co-regulation, I think it's in speaking this language as a family and then, with other families and with extended families and with friends so that we share this common way of understanding how we're human. And when I look and I see a child over there who I don't know, but is having a meltdown, I can have compassion because I understand what's happening in the nervous system. And I can offer something to the parent, perhaps, even if it's just a smile. Those smiles we share, like, oh, I've been there. I'm not judging you. I've been there myself. That's because my nervous system knows what that's like to be in that situation. Right. And I think that's a beautiful thing that can happen. We can create connections. Even, remember neuroception sends messages. I don't even have to say anything. I can share that understanding with another just through a look.
So profound. We'll be right back after this quick break. Hey there, it's Debbie. I love making this show and sharing conversations about how to support our awesome neurodivergent kids. I've seen how even one little insight from an interview can spark a big shift in daily life. But I know that raising complex kids can be messy and lonely. And just when we think we figured it out, something comes up that boots us right back to feeling overwhelmed and stuck. That's why I've poured everything into creating a way for parents like us navigating complex parenting journeys to join together and chart a path that feels positive, hopeful, and doable. It's the brand new Differently Wired Club experience. In the club, you'll get personal support from me and other seasoned parent coaches, 6 live calls every month where you can connect and get your personal questions answered, the opportunity to learn directly from authors and experts like I have on this show, monthly themes for getting specific and tactical, an exclusive private podcast feed, and the best, most generous community of parents. Seriously, these folks show up for themselves and each other, and that right there is really everything, because it's a daily reminder that we're not alone. Our kids aren't broken, and we have totally got this. The recently rebooted Differently Wired Club is on a brand new platform with its very own iOS and Android app. It is such a great space. However you learn, whatever your style, no matter the ages, genders, and neurodivergent profile of your children, the Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Join us today by going to tiltparenting.com/club. That's tiltparenting.com/club. I hope to see you on the inside.
Are you overwhelmed by the things that get in the way of you doing what you want to do? Are you looking for ways to simplify life to better align with your values? Do you want to create space in your schedule so you have room for more of the good stuff? Play, joy, relationships, gratitude, and more? If you answered yes to any of these questions, I invite you to check out Edit Your Life, a podcast to help you edit the unnecessary from your life so you have more room to enjoy the awesome. Through episodes with me, Christine Coe, and a range of super smart, compassionate, and thoughtful guests, you'll come away with big picture insights and practical ways to declutter your home, schedule, and mental space without getting bogged down by perfection. I have always believed that small moments and actions matter tremendously. My goal is to help you find agency and space in your life through doable baby steps that will leave you feeling accomplished instead of overwhelmed. Check out Edit Your Life wherever you enjoy your podcasts.
I did want to ask, you talk about the power of the breath as a way to get us back online. And I was wondering, I know it's a great strategy for in the moment, but doing this as a regular practice, can we also kind of front load our nervous system by doing that work?
Yes, and I love front loading. I tell people you need to be proactive about this because in the moment, you're never going to be able to reach for your resources because you're too far into survival, right? So all of these things we want to practice when we don't need them, right? Because then we begin to build that capacity, and breathing is one of those. Breathing is an autonomic nervous system experience. So it means that if we manipulate our breath, we can begin to shape our state. The caveat I would offer is that we have created breath patterns, or our nervous system has created breath patterns in order to keep us either away from traumatic material or keep us away from things that will dysregulate. And so as we change our breath and play with it, we just want to be careful because we're altering the pattern the nervous system has created to keep us in a certain place. So that said, yes, we want to practice. And the thing that I find the easiest is to talk about sighing, because we sigh spontaneously many times a day. So it's something that just happens, right? And we can intentionally sigh because the research says that sighing interrupts and begins to reset just briefly both our thoughts and our biology. So it's a brain body experience of resetting. And we sigh. I love to sigh. And when you invite somebody to, okay, let's just sigh with frustration together, it's kind of fun. It brings a little sort of, oh yeah, that was a good one. So we sigh in frustration all the time. And sometimes that can just reorganize that chaotic energy a bit in sympathetic anxiety and anger that we have. If we sigh when we're hopeless or sigh when we're like giving up, it brings a bit of energy back in. And then I love the sighs of relief and contentment when I found my way back to ventral. Oh, let's celebrate this with a sigh, right? So I think people love sighing. It seems like a fun thing to do. So I do it with my grandkids. I say, oh, come on, let's all sigh. And, and they pick which kind of sigh, so then we can play around with it. So, and I didn't write a ton about breath practices because there are so many people who are doing really brilliant breath practices and lots of breath for kids books that are written. So you can find the one that fits. And I guess I would like to say that our nervous systems have a comment about things when we say, these are the 5 things to try. And this is where I started making personal menus. So I want you to make your personal menu, because I kept getting in my inbox 5 things to survive social distancing at the beginning of the pandemic. And it was like 3 of them, my nervous system said, no, thank you. That won't work. And one of them was a maybe and one was a yes. And I thought, oh, is there something wrong with me? So the answer is no, there's nothing wrong with you, right? That there's just your nervous system saying yes, no, or maybe, right? So when you pick up a book that has breath practices, it might work for you, but you want to explore with the person you want to try it with and say, how does your nervous system respond, right? If it's a yes, go ahead. If it's a maybe, experiment. If it's a no, go find a different one. Right. And there's no judgment in that, right? There's no right or wrong way here. There's the way of each individual nervous system. And so play around with finding the resources to create your own resource menu. And families have a great time creating resource menus. They actually create menus, get very creative and write their menus, and they all have their own. And, I'm going to pick from category A and B today. And somebody else says, oh, why don't you try my one over here? I mean, it's just a fun way to begin to play with how we work in these 3 organizing principles: neuroception, hierarchy, co-regulation. But within those principles, we all have our own pathways. And I think that's really lovely to really honor. Right. My pathway is different than one of my granddaughter's pathways. And we have such fun with that because they're just so different. And it's kind of fun to think about that. And she'll say, oh, I'm going to do this. I say, well, I'm not doing that. No, that would not work for me. I'm going to do this. And she'll say, no, thank you. Right. So it brings some playfulness into what I think is a really powerful learning that we all are trying to deepen our connection to our nervous system. That's the listening piece. Tune in, right? Your nervous system sends you information. And sometimes we think about an instinct or a gut feeling, right? That's your nervous system talking to you. Any symptom, and in the clinical world, in the medical world, we have symptoms, right? If we think about that another way, the symptom is your nervous system trying to tell you something. So if you look at your kids and what's happening, their behavior or their symptom, and think, oh, their nervous system is trying to be heard. Let's see how we can listen. That's where we want to go.
So good. And I just have to go back to what you said about sighing, because when I read that, it just already changed something, because I'm assuming or thinking this may be common for my listeners. The sound of our kids sighing is like fingernails on a chalkboard. Like, this kid is never happy and they're negative. Like, we have all these stories about what their sighs mean. And I heard Asher do a big sigh the other day, and I was like, oh, that's a great release.
Right. And isn't that a beautiful experience? I love that. And maybe you even said that out loud. And then that brings attention. Oh, right. Because yes, our brains make up a story when somebody sighs around us. So now that you have the information that sighing is a reset of the system, your brain has that context, will make up a different story, just like you did when Asher sighed. Absolutely. That's really when we understand the science underneath things, we see it differently, which is what we're trying to do. So yeah, so let's sigh away. Absolutely.
I will happily do that. So before we say goodbye, I just want to remind listeners, Deb's book is Anchored. Actually, you've written many books and you have a lot of resources to share. So I'd love to hear where listeners can connect. But the book that we've been talking about is Anchored: How to Befriend Your Nervous System Using Polyvagal Theory. How else can listeners learn about you and the resources that you offer?
Yeah, come to my website. Come take a look around. It's rhythmofregulation.com. And there's a lot of free resources, recorded meditations, all sorts of things you can find. And I will say to your listeners, in early 2023, there's going to be a mapping series for curious human beings, which is what I like to call my non-clinical population. That will be on the website, because I really do want to reach out to just, everyday people who are trying to figure this out. So yeah, come visit.
I will definitely be checking that out. So thank you. And listeners, I'll have links to all of this in the show notes, and I'll update the show notes when that is available as well. So gosh, Deb, thank you so much. my mind is a little blown right now. So I just appreciate you are such a good translator of this. I feel like I have a whole new, deeper understanding of polyvagal, and it's going to just change the way that I show up or even just look at the world, not just my kid or my partner, but the world. It's incredible work. So thank you so much.
And I have to say that just warms my heart, because that is what I hope happens for people, that it changes the way, we see the world.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. To go deeper into this episode, visit the extensive show notes page. For every episode, there's a dedicated page on my website with links to all the resources mentioned, a full transcript, and a podcast player with key takeaways marked so you can easily go back and re-listen to the sections you're most interested in. Just go to tiltparenting.com/podcast and select this episode. The Tilt Parenting Podcast is hosted by me, Debbie Reber, author of the book Differently Wired and the founder of Tilt Parenting. This episode was edited by Andrea Curtis Amasquita, and show notes were put together by myself, Andrea, and Lindsay McFadden. If you get a lot out of this podcast and want to help cover the cost of its production, please consider joining my Patreon campaign. On Patreon, you can sign up to make a small monthly contribution, as little as $2 a month, and it's super easy to sign up. Just go to patreon.com/tiltparenting to learn more, or click on the Patreon link on any show notes page. To follow Tilt Parenting on social media, go to @tiltparenting on Instagram and Twitter, and on Facebook. Lastly, please help this podcast stay visible and easily found by the listeners who need it by subscribing and leaving a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you so much. And that's all for this week. Stay safe, stay well, and take good care. And for more information about this podcast or any of the resources that Tilt offers, visit tiltparenting.com.
Hey, are you a parent of a teenager? Are you feeling overwhelmed about how to be what they need while also holding limits and boundaries that keep them safe? Are you tired of conversations that negate how messy this season of parenting is? Well, I've got you. My name is Casey O'Rourke. I am a positive discipline trainer, parent coach, and the host of the Joyful Courage podcast. Every week, I come to you with an interview digging into tough topics with experts I trust and solo shows that go deep into the personal growth and mindset needed to raise teens in a way that grows them into confident, capable young people. I am not afraid of getting real about the intersection of conscious parenting and the teen years, while also bringing in vulnerability, humor, and lightness. I'm walking the path with you and honored to serve. Listen to Joyful Courage on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you consume podcasts.